Have you ever felt your stomach drop when someone congratulated you? They said exactly what you wanted to hear. Their smile seemed genuine. Their words felt supportive. But your body screamed deception. Something ancient inside you whispered that this person was lying, not with their mouth, but with their soul. You dismissed it as paranoia, told yourself you were overthinking, convinced yourself their enthusiasm was real. But that sick feeling lingered. That hollow ache that comes when love wears the mask of hate. You are not imagining this. You are not being dramatic. You are not losing your mind. Carl Jung discovered that the human psyche contains a shadow realm, where our darkest impulses hide behind civilized facades. This shadow does not announce itself with obvious cruelty or direct confrontation. Instead, it operates through subtle psychological warfare, slow emotional poisoning disguised as care, support that systematically destroys rather than builds. The most dangerous enemies are not the ones who openly oppose you. They are the ones who smile while secretly hoping you fail. When someone harbors unconscious hatred toward you, their psyche will leak this truth through 8 specific behavioral patterns that most people never recognize until devastating betrayal forces them to see. By the time we reach the 8th psychological signature I will reveal, you will possess an almost supernatural ability to detect hidden hostility before it destroys your emotional well-being. The unconscious mind, as Jung demonstrated through decades of clinical observation, operates through mechanisms that leak into conscious behavior in ways most individuals never recognize. These psychological signatures manifest in specific behavioral patterns that betray the true emotional state of those around you, regardless of their conscious intentions or verbal expressions. Understanding these Jungian principles becomes essential when we consider that emotional authenticity in relationships determines both psychological well-being and personal growth. The shadow aspect of personality, which Jung identified as containing all the elements we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, often projects outward toward others in predictable ways. When someone harbors unconscious resentment, competitive feelings, or emotional conflict toward you, their psyche will inevitably express these hidden contents through observable behaviors. These manifestations occur because the unconscious cannot lie, even when the conscious mind attempts deception through social conditioning and cultural expectations. The first psychological pattern emerges through what Jung would recognize as shadow projection disguised as humor. Sarcastic comments that consistently target your vulnerabilities represent more than casual jest. They constitute a form of psychological aggression rooted in unconscious hostility. The individual making these remarks has identified areas where you feel insecure and repeatedly returns to these themes under the guise of entertainment. This behavior pattern reveals an unconscious desire to diminish your emotional strength, while maintaining social acceptability through the framework of humor. Jung observed that individuals who cannot process their own psychological inferior feelings often attempt to create similar feelings in others as a compensatory mechanism. The timing and targeting of such comments demonstrate intentional psychological manipulation rather than spontaneous comedic expression. When you notice that someone's humor consistently leaves you feeling diminished rather than uplifted, you are witnessing the shadow's influence in their behavioral choices. Remember that subscribing to channels that explore genuine psychological insights helps strengthen our collective understanding of human behavior. So consider joining this community by clicking the subscribe button and activating notifications to support deeper psychological education that can transform how we navigate relationships and personal development. The second pattern manifests through what analytical psychology terms passive sabotage, where unconscious hostility expresses itself through seemingly innocent forgetfulness and poor timing. These individuals will consistently fail to provide important information, offer guidance that proves counterproductive, or become unavailable during significant moments in your life. The pattern emerges not through single incidents but through repeated occurrences that suggest unconscious intentionality rather than coincidental circumstances. Jung's understanding of inferior psychological functioning explains how individuals who feel inadequate themselves often attempt to maintain others at a similar level rather than elevating their own position. This dynamic operates below conscious awareness, allowing the person to maintain their self-image as supportive while unconsciously undermining your progress and success. The psychological mechanism involves projecting their own fears of inadequacy onto your potential achievements, creating internal resistance to your growth that manifests as external obstacles. Recognition of this pattern requires observing the cumulative effect of their actions rather than evaluating isolated incidents, as the unconscious operates through consistent themes rather than obvious gestures. The third psychological signature appears as covert competition that Jung would identify as ego complex activation triggered by your achievements or progress. When you share positive developments in your life, these individuals immediately redirect conversation toward their own accomplishments or begin pursuing similar goals with unusual intensity. This response pattern indicates that your success activates their unconscious feelings of inadequacy, triggering compensatory behaviors designed to restore their psychological equilibrium. The competitive dynamic operates independently of any actual contest, existing purely within their psychological framework as a response to perceived threats to their self-worth. Jung observed that individuals with underdeveloped psychological integration often cannot celebrate others' achievements because such success highlights their own unrealized potential. The unconscious responds to your growth as evidence of their stagnation, creating internal pressure to demonstrate comparable or superior accomplishments. This pattern reveals itself through the timing and intensity of their competitive responses, which correlate directly with the significance of your announced achievements. Understanding this dynamic helps explain why certain relationships feel exhausting despite apparent mutual support, as you are unknowingly participating in psychological competitions you never entered. The fourth pattern emerges through what Jung termed ego dissociation, where individuals become emotionally disconnected from authentic human experience while maintaining social functionality. These people perform the expected social responses without genuine emotional engagement, creating interactions that feel hollow despite technically appropriate content. Their expressions of care, congratulations, or concern lack the energetic resonance that accompanies authentic emotional connection, leaving you with a sense of emptiness after interactions. Jung recognized this psychological state as a defense mechanism against overwhelming emotions, but its impact on relationships creates profound isolation for both parties. The individual has unconsciously severed their connection to authentic feeling in order to avoid psychological pain, resulting in mechanistic responses to emotional situations. This disconnection prevents them from accessing the empathy and genuine care that healthy relationships require, though they may intellectually understand appropriate responses. Recognition of this pattern involves trusting your emotional response to their presence rather than analyzing their words, as the unconscious communicates through energetic rather than verbal channels. The fifth psychological manifestation involves what analytical psychology identifies as control masked as care, where unconscious anxiety about personal chaos leads to attempts to dominate others' decisions. These individuals will consistently question your choices, suggest alternative approaches, and express concern about your judgment in ways that gradually erode your confidence in your own decision-making abilities. The psychological mechanism operates through creating dependency rather than empowerment, ensuring that you begin seeking their approval before making important life choices. Jung understood that individuals who cannot manage their own psychological complexity often attempt to create order through controlling external circumstances, particularly other people's behaviors. This pattern disguises itself as wisdom, experience, or genuine concern, making it difficult to recognize the underlying need for dominance that drives these interactions. The long-term effect involves transferring your internal locus of control to their external influence, creating psychological dependency that serves their unconscious need for significance. Recognition requires examining whether their guidance consistently empowers your autonomy or gradually increases your reliance on their input for life decisions. The sixth pattern appears through gossip and character assassination that Jung would recognize as shadow projection onto your reputation within social groups. These individuals will share carefully selected information about you with others, framing your actions or motivations in ways that create doubt about your character or intentions. The psychological dynamic involves projecting their own unconscious, negative qualities onto you while positioning themselves as the source of important information about your true nature. Jung observed that individuals who cannot acknowledge their own moral complexity often attempt to locate these qualities in others as a form of psychological relief. This behavior serves the dual purpose of elevating their social position while diminishing yours, addressing unconscious feelings of inadequacy through comparative diminishment. The pattern operates through strategic information sharing rather than direct confrontation, maintaining their image as concerned friends while systematically undermining your relationships. Recognition involves noticing shifts in how others respond to you after spending time with these individuals, as well as sensing when conversations halt abruptly upon your arrival. The seventh psychological signature manifests through what Jung termed emotional withdrawal during success, where individuals cannot authentically celebrate your achievements due to unconscious competitive dynamics. When you experience positive developments, their responses lack genuine enthusiasm despite technically appropriate words, creating a discordancy between verbal content and emotional energy. This pattern reveals unconscious resentment toward your progress because it highlights their own stagnation or unrealized potential, triggering feelings they cannot consciously acknowledge. Jung recognized that individuals often prefer others to remain at familiar levels of functioning because change disrupts their psychological equilibrium and challenges their self-perception. The withdrawal occurs because authentic celebration would require acknowledging your growth, which unconsciously threatens their position in the relationship dynamic. Their emotional absence during your victories serves to minimize the significance of your achievements while avoiding direct confrontation about their competitive feelings. Understanding this pattern helps explain why sharing good news with certain people leaves you feeling deflated rather than supported, as their unconscious conflicts contaminate the interaction. The eighth and most revealing pattern involves what Jung identified as unconscious communication through body language that contradicts verbal expressions. The human nervous system responds to emotional truth independently of conscious intention, creating physical manifestations that reveal authentic psychological states regardless of verbal content. When someone harbors unconscious negative feelings toward you, their body will express this reality through micro-expressions, posture changes, breathing patterns, and energetic shifts that your intuitive faculties detect. Jung emphasized that the unconscious always communicates through somatic channels, meaning that authentic emotional states leak through physical expression even when consciously suppressed. These individuals may speak words of support while their facial expressions remain rigid, their eye contact wavers, their posture closes off, or their energy feels contracted rather than expansive. The psychological principle operates because emotional authenticity requires integration between conscious intention and unconscious feeling, and when these elements conflict, the body expresses the deeper truth. Your intuitive response to these physical contradictions represents ancient survival wisdom that evolved to detect potential threats disguised as allies within social groups. Recognition of this pattern requires trusting your bodily felt sense of interactions rather than relying solely on verbal content, as the unconscious speaks through energy before words. The temporal lag between authentic emotion and controlled expression often creates noticeable delays in their responses, such as delayed smiles, forced laughter, or mechanical gestures that feel rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Understanding these 8 psychological patterns through Jung's analytical framework provides insight into the complex dynamics that operate beneath the surface of social relationships. The shadow aspects of personality will always seek expression, regardless of conscious intentions or social conditioning that attempts to suppress these natural psychological forces. Recognition of these patterns empowers you to make informed decisions about emotional investments and boundary setting without requiring confrontation or dramatic relationship changes. Jung's greatest insight involved understanding that unconscious contents will manifest behaviorally, regardless of conscious awareness, making these patterns universal rather than personal character flaws. The goal becomes protecting your psychological well-being while maintaining compassion for others' unconscious struggles, recognizing that these behaviors often stem from unprocessed emotional wounds rather than malicious intent. Developing sensitivity to these psychological dynamics enhances your ability to navigate relationships from a position of awareness, rather than unconscious reactivity to others' projections and emotional conflicts. The integration of this knowledge supports both personal growth and emotional freedom by reducing the likelihood of unconscious psychological manipulation, affecting your decision-making and self-perception. Jung's research revealed that individuals who develop sensitivity to these psychological patterns experience what he termed enhanced individuation, the process by which a person becomes psychologically whole through conscious integration of unconscious contents. This individuation process becomes accelerated when you can recognize the shadow projections of others before they contaminate your own psychological development. The ability to detect hidden hostility serves as protection for your authentic self-expression, preventing others' unconscious conflicts from derailing your personal evolution toward psychological maturity. When you understand these 8 behavioral signatures, you develop what Jung called differentiated consciousness, the capacity to distinguish between genuine emotional connection and unconscious psychological manipulation disguised as relationship. This differentiation becomes crucial because undeveloped individuals often mistake intensity for intimacy, confusing emotional drama with authentic connection, leading to relationships that drain rather than nourish psychological well-being. Jung observed that people who cannot recognize these patterns often become unconscious participants in psychological triangles, where hidden competitive dynamics create chronic emotional instability within social groups. The recognition of these dynamics allows you to maintain emotional equilibrium even when surrounded by individuals operating from unconscious psychological wounds that manifest as subtle aggression toward your success and happiness. Understanding the shadow's influence in human behavior reveals why certain relationships feel exhausting despite appearing supportive on the surface, as unconscious hostility creates energetic friction that depletes your psychological resources. This depletion occurs because your nervous system responds to the incongruence between conscious words and unconscious intentions, creating chronic stress that affects both mental clarity and emotional stability. Jung emphasized that psychological maturity requires developing the capacity to remain centered in your authentic self-expression, regardless of others' unconscious reactions to your growth and success. This centering becomes possible when you understand that others' shadow projections reveal their internal psychological state rather than reflecting any truth about your character or worthiness. The development of this psychological immunity protects you from absorbing others' unconscious emotional content, allowing you to maintain compassion without becoming contaminated by their unprocessed psychological material. Jung's analytical psychology ultimately teaches us that consciousness expansion benefits both individual development and collective human evolution through increased awareness of unconscious psychological processes. These insights transform how we understand human behavior by revealing the profound complexity operating beneath apparent simplicity in daily social interactions and relationship dynamics. The application of these principles supports the development of psychological sophistication that enhances both personal authenticity and the capacity for genuine connection with others who demonstrate integrated consciousness. Advanced practitioners of Jungian psychology learn to distinguish between relationships that support psychological growth and those that unconsciously undermine personal development through subtle emotional manipulation. This discrimination becomes essential for maintaining psychological health in environments where unconscious competitive dynamics masquerade as supportive community or professional collaboration. Jung recognized that individuals committed to conscious development often trigger unconscious reactions in others who remain identified with ego-level functioning, rather than pursuing authentic psychological integration. These reactions manifest through the 8 patterns we have explored, creating predictable behavioral responses that reveal the psychological development level of individuals within your social environment. Understanding these patterns represents the beginning, rather than the conclusion of psychological development, as deeper layers of unconscious dynamics continue revealing themselves through ongoing self-observation and relational awareness. The mastery of these insights requires practical application in real-world situations, learning to trust your intuitive responses while maintaining analytical clarity about the psychological dynamics operating beneath surface interactions. Jung emphasized that true psychological freedom emerges when you can navigate social relationships from a position of conscious awareness, rather than unconscious reactivity to others' shadow projections and emotional immaturity. This freedom allows you to choose relationships that genuinely support your psychological development, while gracefully distancing yourself from dynamics that drain your emotional energy through hidden competitive agendas. Remember that psychological growth requires courage to examine uncomfortable truths about human nature, while maintaining hope for authentic connection and mutual understanding between individuals committed to conscious development. The journey toward psychological maturity involves learning to recognize both your own shadow projections and those of others, creating space for genuine healing and authentic relationship rather than unconscious psychological warfare disguised as friendship. This exploration of Jungian psychology demonstrates how ancient wisdom regarding human nature remains profoundly relevant for navigating contemporary relational challenges and personal growth opportunities in our complex social environment.